Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at finding slope and y-intercept from tables when we're looking at real-world scenarios. So here we have a problem, and it tells us that this table shows the linear relationship. And guys, linear relationship just means that it is a relationship between x and y that forms a straight line. So it's exactly what that word sounds like. So this table shows a linear relationship between the number of hours Frances worked, X, and the amount of money Frances earned, Y. And the problem goes on to say that we want to find the y-intercept and we want to find the rate of change, or our slope. So our slope we can find by looking at that change in y compared to the change of x. And our b, which is our y-intercept, is just that initial value. It's that constant number. And if we're looking at this scenario, the number of hours worked, the amount earned, if I work 0 hours, then I will make 0 money, which means that my y-intercept right now is equal to 0. And if this is equal to 0, that means that it goes through the origin, which means that this is a proportional situation. But we want to find our slope, our rate of change. And so I look and I see from 1.25 to 3.75. I think, how did that change? Well, it increased, and it increased by $2.50. So that was my change in x, which means it will go in the denominator of my ratio. And as the x increased by 2.5, my y over here went up as well. So if I go and I find the difference between 52.50 minus 17.50, I find that it increased by $35. So it increased by $35. So that tells me that the amount that Frances earns, so she earns $35 for every 2.5 hours. Well, anytime you talked about hourly wages, that doesn't really help us. We want to know what she makes per hour. So I am going to divide 35 into 2.5, because if I know how much money she makes in 2.5 hours, I want to know how much she makes in 1 hour. So I can find that by dividing by 2.5. So on my calculator, I go 35 divided by 2.5, and I get 14. And so that tells me that my slope is 14, but because we have a real-world context, it has more meaning to that. That 14 tells me that she earns $14 in 1 hour. So it's that rate of how much she makes per time increment. Because they're going to ask you to calculate your slope and your y-intercept, but also to interpret it, right? And so we're not just looking at numbers that are naked and by themselves and have no meaning, but these numbers have a lot of meaning. So we're going to look at one more table. And now we have a gym membership. So our gym charges a membership fee plus an additional fee per yoga class. Well, just thinking of that scenario right now, I'm like, I think I'll only pay the membership fee one time, but I'm going to have to pay for each yoga class that I attend. So if I think in terms of my equation, my linear equation, slope-intercept form, my slope is the thing that's the multiplicative piece. So between a membership fee and an additional fee per yoga class, the multiplicative part is the yoga fee. Or excuse me, not the yoga fee, the cost per class, because it's happening over and over and over. But the membership fee is only happening one time. So that's my initial value, or my y-intercept. And the table shows this linear relationship between the number of classes and the total number I'm spending. And we want to find what M, so what that slope, what that rate of change is, and what B is. But we also want to make sure that we interpret them. So I want to work smarter, not harder. And I see some nice whole numbers. So I'm going to start finding my slope because that's where I feel comfortable. And I know that slope is the comparison of how y changes to how x changes. And I see that I have a whole number here, 75, and a whole number here, 120. So I'm thinking that might be easier for me to work with. So from 75 to 120, I have added $45. And as I added $45, I went from 8 classes to 20 classes, which means I added 12 classes. So when we look at that slope, that was an increase of $45 for an increase of 12 classes. But again, I don't want to know how much it increases for 12 classes. I want to know how much it increases for one class. So I can set up a ratio table where I compare that. So if it was $45 to an increase by 12 classes, how much would it take per one class? So that's where I just simplify and I divide by 12. So I take my calculator and I divide it by 12 to get 375. And what that means is it's an increase of 375. So as y increases by 375, x will increase by 1. So my cost per class is $3.75. So that's going to be my slope. So my slope is $3.75 per class. But I still need to know what that fee is. I still want to know what B is. And so I'm going to work backwards. I see that I have 6 classes for $67.50. I'm going to use the information I have in my slope. I want to get backwards to 0. I want to know how much does it cost me when I've done 0 classes. So I want to subtract 6. Well, if I'm working backwards, if when I add 12, I have to add 45. So when I increase by 45, I'm increasing by 12 for my comparison of change in y to change in x. Then that means for an increase of 6 to x, I would increase by 22.5 to y, because it increases at that same rate. So if I'm working backwards then, a decrease of 6 means a decrease of 22.5. So I'll take my calculator and I'll go 67.5 minus 22.5. And I'll find that when I have done 0 classes, I still have to pay $45, which means that my initial fee, that membership fee, is $45 just to join the gym. All right, thanks, guys.